Good evening, everybody. Just waiting for everybody to join the session today. Good evening. People are still joining, so we're just waiting for you to join before we start the session today. Okay, well, we're ready to kick off. It's 7 o'clock. It's a Thursday evening. My name's Anna Hall, and I'm the Director of Operations at RDA. I'm delighted to start this session today on our road to restart. We're focusing today on coaching. We've got three fantastic speakers for you today. So we've got Joe Hayward, our Training and Education Manager. We've got Sarah Healing, Regional Coach and Advanced Coach. And we've got Lynne Munro, Regional Coach and Regional Physiotherapist. For those of you who haven't joined a webinar like this before, you are all muted and we can't see any of you. So the only way that you can ask questions of us is to use the little Q&A button. So if you go to the bottom of your screen, there is a little bubble that says Q&A. So if you've got any questions, please just type them in there and then we will pose those questions to Sarah and Lynne at the end of the presentation. So without any further ado, I'd like to hand over now to Joe, Sarah and Lynne, who will present to you all about restarting and coaching.
Good evening, everyone. Sarah is going to take the lead on this for us, where to start. So Sarah, if I could hand over to you, please.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us all. So where do we start? I guess many of us had a restart already back in the summer last year. So we've had a bit of a practice run, but that to me was quite a long time ago. So we've got to do it all again. So the most important part to begin with is really to check that your group has been signed off with RDA UK. All your COVID risk assessments need to be done. And certainly within our own group, we are updating those, going through them again, just making sure everything is still current in the climate and what the expectations are. It really is your responsibility to keep up to date with any extra guidelines coming out. So keep an eye on government websites, looking at the RDA guidelines. Website is kept up to date regularly. British Equestrian and Sport England are also very good at keeping us updated on any relevant information. And also just keep an eye locally. I think, you know, where we were put into the tier system before, we've got regional guidelines coming out. And obviously Scotland, Wales, England and Northern Ireland have different things at different times, depending on what's going on. So it's important that you do just keep checking back on the website. I can't remember the heading, Joe, for the drop down where they can find the information. Is it
the getting started on the website?
That's it, yeah. Getting started is where the drop down is, and you've got everything possible that they're adding onto that on the website. So make sure you do keep up to date and keep checking back on that.
Can I just chip in there? So we've actually renamed that road to restart because this is now our new 2021 approach. So it's actually the drop down is called the road to restart. So getting started is so 2020.
I knew it had a different name. I just couldn't at that moment in time. So thank you. Yeah,
it's all right.
Okay, and then something else just to think about within your groups is PPE. There's been a lot of talk about this right from the beginning. I remember right at the beginning of the first lockdown, we were being advised not to be using face masks and things. I think now everybody's quite used to wearing them and using them, and I think that is to be encouraged when we're starting to get people back and riders. But obviously every group is different. So again, keep up to date on the guidelines and do what's right within your groups. Okay, so we've got lots and lots of different groups in RDA, and one size really doesn't fit all. So we thought we'd split between a lot of your groups at riding schools. Obviously, you're going to find this much harder to get back because you're not in control of everything that can be done. So you do need to communicate with the riding school you're based at. If you're borrowing ponies, Tack, making sure that everything is clean, sanitized. And it may be that these are the groups that take longer to return because there's a few more things to be put in place to make sure that everybody's being kept safe. So communication is key. And yeah, just keep asking for help and referring to your regional people to give you some guidance if you need some help there, communicating with your riding schools. So the large centres, I think quite a few of the large centres were probably the first groups back last year as well, and are probably the ones working at the moment to be back first, because we are in control of what we can do. We can train staff, we can communicate with our volunteers, we can zone our areas better because we're in control of the site and where everything is. So we're not necessarily mixing with a normal mainstream riding school. So that just makes it all a lot easier. Still need to have good plans in place. Make sure you've got people that can meet and greet, so everybody knows the expectation when they arrive. Have a waiting area, and everything is just a bit more controllable. So you've got to have a plan and communicate this to your riders and your volunteers and your staff teams to get that right. Track and trace, we've all heard lots of. I think most groups have seen the QR code. You can download this and get your own personalised code for your groups off the government website. I don't know how many people use it. We try to encourage it for anybody that's visiting our site, but I know some people don't want to use it. But again, it's down to individual groups as to whether or not you're actually reinforcing that when people come through the gate.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. I think we're going to hand over to Lynne now to look at communicating with our riders.
Oh, that's great. Thank you, Sarah, for a really clear introduction. And thank you, Jo. So when we're looking at communication with our riders, then on the left-hand side of the screen, you can see the participant application form, which all groups will be very familiar with. But there is a new revised version that will be coming out, subject to approval fairly soon, with just some minor changes. Most of the information will remain exactly the same, but there's just a slight different way of presenting it. And of course, every participant in RDA has to have an up-to-date form. And so thinking about that, you know that the forms have to be renewed every 3 years. And so now might be a good time, if you're thinking about some of your participants, that actually you need to get a new form completed and signed, because a year or more is quite a long time for some people before they can resume riding again, riding, driving or vaulting. And it might be a very good idea to actually have a new form in place for them in case there have been any changes. And then of course, moving on to the middle, we've got the COVID consent form. And all these forms are available on My RDA, so you can easily find them. And so the participant consent form is very specific, that has to be signed because of COVID. And so what it does is ask for participant or parent or legal guardian signature to say that the person is COVID-free and able and ready to resume RDA. But of course, that needs to be considered in the light of changes too, doesn't it? And one of the things is that the requirement is that people need to continue to inform us if there are changes that go alongside it. So whilst it's signed on one date, doesn't mean that that's how it is forever. So there's a requirement for the participant and their legal guardians and parents to keep informing us about any changes. And obviously then we can help them more, can't we? And then moving on to the right-hand side of the screen, you can see the applicant assessment form, which some of you will be familiar with. And of course, this is really important to try and complete. Some groups find it tricky, but there's physiotherapy support available for you to actually complete the form. And it's a really good idea if you're inviting people once activities can resume to do this, because alongside the application form, if there are any noted changes, then an assessment form would be a really good idea to find out where the applicant is at this particular time, because where they finished riding maybe 12 months ago or even longer is perhaps not where they're going to be on resuming. And so you need to really be aware of the current situation with them. And particularly if one question that came into us was that if anybody had, a participant had tested positive for COVID and had continuing symptoms of that, how do they report that to us? So that makes it doubly important that we find out exactly what their state of health is as well, so that we can help them best. And so it's really important to have that communication unmounted, a meet and greet, as I call it, so that you can really find out exactly what's going on before you ever think about resuming where you left off. So we're in a different place from where we were, and so it's really important to look at all this information, and the forms are there available. So just have a look at them on My RDA and get familiar with them. If you're not familiar with them, then have a little look and see, and if you need any help, we'll come on to this later in the presentation about where you can go to for help. And so thinking out, what do you need to find out? What information is really important to find out? Well, of course, participant fitness and stamina, but of course that maybe goes for your volunteers too. We're all a year further on or maybe longer, and people not quite as fit maybe as where they are, and thinking about volunteers particularly, maybe walking on the arena surfaces and so on. So you need to check that out too. But participant fitness and stamina is really important. A lot of people have become deconditioned during lockdown just because of lack of opportunity and being able to get out and about. And so what they were doing perhaps in their riding, vaulting and driving sessions a year or more ago, they're perhaps not able to start at that level again. And we need to be mindful of that. And so starting at a lesser place and then hopefully building speed gradually will get everybody back to their fitness and stamina too. Of course, we've got these thorny issues of height and weight, haven't we? A lot of youngsters will have grown, but a lot of people will have put on weight too. And as you know, on the application form, there is a requirement for stating height and weight, because we need to be mindful of our horses' weight carrying limits as well. And so it's really important to know how much the participants currently weigh, not what they used to weigh, but how much they weigh now, because we need to help them best. And don't forget, of course, that for some youngsters, their heads grow too. And so the hat size may have changed. And so the helmet they were riding up to standard back along, they're maybe not able to do that. So you might have to think about wearing a different helmet for them. So then you need to think about, are there any changes in their medical condition? And that's really important. And going back to those previous slides, you can see that actually having that application form completed, if it is a changing medical condition, is really important, because we want to help all of our participants, and so therefore we need to know the current information. And for lots and lots of people, the anxiety of return is huge, because they haven't been out of the house maybe for a long time, and suddenly coming back into maybe how they remember, or maybe they don't quite remember. And so we need to ease their return gradually and support them as best we can. And that's where the quiet corner is really useful, isn't it, for doing unmounted activities rather than thinking you're going to go back to exactly where you left off last session, last March. Maybe that's not possible. We need to think as well, jumping to the top right-hand side, thinking about actually, are there other options? I mentioned quiet corner just now, but is an equine simulator maybe the way to go to start? So thinking about gradually introducing people to being back in the RDA setting, maybe doing unmounted sessions, rather than actually thinking you're going to go straight back into riding, driving or vaulting again. So it's a very slow return, gradual return, because that will enable success. And then, of course, foremost, maybe we should have put this first, thinking about the horse as well, isn't it? So where is the horse in this? What has the horse been doing for the last year or so? And has it been ridden regularly? Has it not been ridden? What weight is it? And so on. And so we really need to think about the welfare of the horse. If we're going to ask the horse to carry unbalanced riders again, we need to make sure that the horse is fit and sound to do that. And so that's our paramount importance.
Okay, so moving on to our volunteers, hugely important part of what we do in RDA and the backbone of every RDA group. I think communication is absolutely paramount. We have to engage with our volunteers. For many, they haven't been to see us now for a year. And I think lots and lots of them are chomping at the bit to be back. Whilst they might be chomping at the bit, they may also have concerns about coming back and worrying about their fitness level, and if they can remember how to tack up, if they're confident still leading a pony, meeting other people. You know, we've all been locked away for a while, and I think just those social skills, you know, sometimes just take a little time to get back to everybody. So the first thing we want to do is engage with them, communicate with them, either by telephone or by email, and check their application forms are still up to date, make sure their details haven't changed. Again, we need the COVID consent form. and communicate with them and ask them questions. We ran a little survey to all our volunteers at Pennywells and asked them very specific questions about how they feel about coming back. Are they happy to come back? Will they be back? What they would like to do when they come back. And I had a list of chores, because everything's going to be slightly different, because they can't just have a free rein and do all the tasks they used to do in groups. So I need to know the people that actually are willing to maybe do a bit of housework, or clean tack, or go poo pick fields. All these other jobs that are around the yards all have to be done by somebody. So it's good to know before they turn up that they're happy to do the job you're going to ask them to do. So it's really good to engage with them and have that conversation. Not many are going to be back straight into the arena, so they're not going to be starting off where they left off, because leading, sidewalking and everything is going to take us all time to get back to any normal sessions. And to begin with, we're going to be one-to-one, so we're not going to have the groups. Schools will take longer to come back. So it's a very different RDA, and I think people need to be aware of that before they turn up. Certainly our volunteers have found the quiet has been the hardest part, because it's not got the buzz and the activity level and the busy feel about the centre as it might have had before we went into lockdown. So that's just something to be very aware of. There's quite a lot of talk about vaccines. I guess certain generations have already had their vaccines and begun to have those, and they filter through, and hopefully eventually will be coming down, certainly to my age group, fairly soon. And I think that does give it an added confidence to people returning. But you've still got an awful lot of people that won't be vaccinated when we're allowed to reopen, and that's something to consider. And every group is different, and it has to be what's right for each individual. Okay, and that moves us on to coaches, which I think probably most people watching are from the coaching point of view, because we're all about getting back to coaching and into that arena with our riders. Again, it's about engaging with you. It's about communicating, making sure again that you're happy to be back in that situation. If you you need to make sure your paperwork is up to date, so your volunteer forms, COVID consent forms. I actually adapted the COVID consent forms within our group to make them more coach specific. So I just didn't do a lot of altering. I just changed them slightly so that the wording, because coaching is slightly different to your volunteers, and I needed to know that people were happy to be back coaching. So that might be something to consider. What else? First aid. First aid training has started again. I did a face-to-face refresher just last week that worked really, really well through St John's, and I know we've got all sorts of links to first aid companies through RDA. So make sure you have got first aiders that are becoming up to date now, keeping up with that. Safeguarding, I believe, can be done online, and I know there's been a few online sessions for safeguarding. So again, it's your responsibility to go out there, make sure that you are up to date and you're complying with the rules. Reviews, everyone will be pleased to hear, have been put on hold. So there are plenty of online CPD activities taking place, so make sure you get signed up and get logged onto them and enjoy them. You know, people are working really hard to put these together, and I certainly hope it's a way forward for RDA, and I'd like to think they're going to be popular, and everybody will take them up. So get onto those, because that does count as your CPD in place of any reviews being taken at the moment.
Thank you, Sarah. Lynne, would you like to talk to us a little bit about equines, please?
Yep. So really important. Equine welfare is so important, isn't it? We've got to think about what the horses have been doing for the last 12 months or so. Their level of fitness is so important, isn't it? Are they used to being led and handled still, with regard to RDA safe practice guidelines too? So yes, they may be led and yes, they may be handled, but actually it may not be quite how it is in RDA. And so people who are thinking about getting their equines back into fitness again need to start leading as we do in RDA sessions, which is really important. And of course, the fit of the tack is really, really crucial, because if the horse isn't comfortable with the tack that's on it, then it's not going to be suitable and fit for purpose, and the rider won't be comfortable either. And of course, if the horse has changed shape over the last 12 months, then there needs to be a review of the tack, review of the saddle, to see whether it's still suitable and appropriate. And if you need help, then you need to get professional advice from that. And of course, we've got our regional equine advisors and our regional vets that are on hand to help us. And so then we need to think about, are the horses still suitable for their usual riders? Then if the rider has changed shape and the horse has changed shape, and then maybe that isn't the same situation, is it? Maybe the rider has grown, and so the horse or pony that they rode last year actually might not be suitable again. So that might be another issue that you might be needing to deal with, about how you introduce a new equine to your rider where they've become very attached to the one that they used to ride a while ago. And so that needs sensitive handling, and I'm sure you'll have great ideas about how you can do that, sharing pictures and so on of what the horse likes to do and everything alongside that. So the most important part of this is that we look at our horse welfare, so that we check that our horses are fit for purpose, that our riders are fit and able to start riding again when and able they can. Whether unmounted sessions, quiet corner sessions are the way to start, but making sure that the overall picture is one of harmony and well-being for both horse and rider. And that goes obviously for carriage driving too, and vaulting. So it's an important part obviously of what we do, looking at equine welfare. And so you need to make sure that the horses are trained and used and being familiarised back into the RDA setting again before you start. And that can take some time, as you know. So if you're bringing horses back into work, if they've had time off, then you need to do that gradually and sensitively for the horse's well-being.
Thank you. Sarah, would you like to share your thoughts on the use of family or bubble members trained up to help facilitate participants coming back?
Yeah, I think this is quite a big area really, and we're not going to go into too much detail, but I think every group is different. And I think there are some groups that feel very comfortable using family members, and there's just as many groups out there that don't feel quite so comfortable. I think one size doesn't fit all, and it has to be what's right for each individual group and the kind of ponies you've got, the sort of riders you've got, and the sort of parents you have. Everybody's different, and not every parent is cut out to lead a pony or side help their child. So I think we have to be quite careful if we're asking family members to take part. Again, paperwork has to be in place, so they need a volunteer form, they need to sign a COVID consent form. We do need to train them, and that's the stumbling block with quite a few, because we can't be up close with them. We need to be able to train them from a distance. So the suitability of them to be able to then carry that through, you need to be sure that they're the right people for the job. Lots are, but there are some that maybe we'd rather not be using. So we need to be very diplomatic and very careful how we go about that. And as I say, some groups do this, some groups don't. I think you just have to choose wisely. I also am a big believer in, I think, let's encourage our riders to come back and do more for themselves. You know, those that really can. I think it came as a shock to us all when we were putting our more able independent riders back on. We're like, why did we never teach them to do this? Why didn't we make them do their own girths 2 years ago? Why weren't they doing their own stirrups? Some were, but not all. And actually, we've proved now that more can be doing that, and they can be more independent for themselves. And I think that's really important to keep encouraging. It's about opportunity, isn't it? It's what we can do. So, yeah. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Sarah. And Lynne, would you finally like to wrap up on where people can go for more help if necessary?
Great, thank you, Jo. So yeah, so where to go to for help? Well, the obvious place to start is from a more experienced coach within your own group, because they've got knowledge of your local circumstances and the setting you're in, and so they can advise you best. So that's the starting point. If it's a bigger problem than that you think, oh gosh, I need some more help, then don't forget you've got your county and regional coaches, and Sarah and I are both regional coaches, and we're ready and waiting to help you. I had a phone call today from a coach from another region. I'm in West Mercia, but another region of mine, asking about an inquiry for a potential rider, and just wanting to know what kind of questions maybe to ask to get the best information from the parent and so on. And so we're really, really happy to help. So either, get in touch with us, email, phone, or whatever. And then, of course, you've got a county and regional physiotherapists as well, and CPTRH reps too. So charter physios in therapeutic riding and hippotherapy, that's what that stands for. And these are all listed in that RDA handbook. So you can find our contact details, or if you're in doubt, then you can get in touch with National Office and they'll put you in touch with your local physiotherapist. And so it's really important. So thinking back to the application form and the assessment form, if you need help with that, if you're unsure about how to do that, how to complete that, then please get in touch with a local physiotherapist, because then we can advise you from a distance. And now we've got Zoom, of course, you know, we can have these interactive chats, can't we, which makes life a lot easier. And so the next one says all the information is on my RDA and in the handbook as well. And if you think you contact someone and it's not current or you don't get an answer, get in touch with National Office and they'll put you straight as to who can help you and so on. Because that's really important. We're a network within RDA, aren't we? Starting from your own group, but working through county, region, up to national level. And it's really important that we all work as a team. And the information is there and available for you. And it may not be just in your own county or your own region, but because we're part of this network within the UK, then everyone is very happy to help you. So just get in touch. If you've got any queries, then don't hesitate to either pick up the phone or email, and somebody will get back in touch with you to help.
Great, thank you. Right, now I'm going to pass over to Anna, who I think has been fielding all the questions that have been coming in, and hopefully we'll be able to get through those and answer some of those for you. Sorry, Anna, you're still on mute.
I knew I'd do that at some point. So thank you for this. Lynne and Sarah, that was absolutely brilliant. Really, really comprehensive. Thank you so much for that. I think there's, I could see the questions coming through. It was like ticking up as you were talking. So the first question, which I hope you don't mind, I'm going to take, is there any guidance on what to do if we have participants or volunteers who refuse to have the vaccine? So we have actually been asked this quite a few times. I'm just going to glance at my phone because I've created a bit of an answer that I've responded to a number of people on. So the key message is that legally we cannot require volunteers to be vaccinated because the government haven't mandated it. That is not even permitted in employment, so we can't require it. Groups can, however, require any new volunteers to be vaccinated when they sign up, but that would exclude lots of people at the moment, which Sarah mentioned when she was talking. So please be aware that that could exclude huge numbers of people. Even if someone is vaccinated, they would still need to do a symptom check before they came to a group, practice good hand hygiene, washing, sanitisation, observe social distancing, and wear a face covering where that's appropriate. So actually having a vaccination, they still would need to do all the things that somebody without a vaccination would need to do. In addition, where someone cannot get vaccinated due to medical reasons, that volunteer may feel more comfortable in undertaking tasks where at least the full 2 meters social distancing can always be easily adhered to. So please bear that in mind for your group. All groups can do, therefore, is encourage people to be vaccinated to protect themselves. And the emerging evidence seems to suggest that it may also reduce transmission to others. So it actually is supporting the group as well, but we cannot require it. So hopefully that's quite clear about vaccination. The next question I've got is there's been no guidance from the government on lead rein lessons yet. Can we do lead rein, holding and supporting riders? So I'm just going to quickly chip in on that as well, but then I will pass over to Lynne and Sarah about how they've actually done it previously with previous releases of lockdown. So most governments, and certainly England, have a disability dispensation, which is listed on the My RDA website. And that allows us to get closer than social distancing would normally allow to support riders, drivers and vaulters to access our sport. Obviously, we need to make sure that we are wearing face coverings when we're breaching social distancing. But we do know that we can lead within the 2 meter or with the 2 meter or the 1 meter plus mitigation social distancing in England. In relation to sidewalkers, they do need to be within the household bubble. So that's what Sarah was talking about, having volunteers within the bubble. So Sarah, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I can a little bit. I think, again, I think it has to be down to what your volunteers and your group are happy to do. Certainly when we returned last time, we didn't do any leading at all. We didn't get that far. When we return this time, we're starting very similar to what we did before. Although I have in my mini survey to our volunteers asked the question of who would be happy to lead. And I think it's really important people can say no. They mustn't feel pressurized into doing that part of what we would want them to do. The only other thing I think Lynne and I talked about yesterday was just be careful what size pony you're leading with, because if you've got a very small pony, you're obviously going to be very close to the rider still. So, you know, your tiddlers, you still need to be very aware of how close you're getting with each other, because it's about keeping everybody safe, isn't it? We want our riders to be safe, we want ourselves to be safe, and if you've got family members doing side walking, they need to be safe as well. So you just need to, I think you just need to be very careful, very aware, and it could be different for every rider. You know, what works for one may not work for the next rider. So I think we've constantly got to be reassessing the situation and going with what feels right.
I think also just to add on that, if someone is closer than the 1 metre or the 2 metre social distancing would normally allow, even if they are leading, they would be classed as a close contact. So if the rider did test positive for COVID, they would need to self-isolate. So that needs to be borne in mind as well. So that's why you would need to seek that kind of extra level of permission to do that. Mm-hmm. Next question I've got, if we have the COVID application forms and assessment forms from when we restarted last August, and I've got one mentioning June, do we need to do these new forms again? Any thoughts?
I'm assuming mine still count. Again, it's about communication, isn't it? So I guess you just need to make sure that everybody remembers they signed that form, because it was now a good 6 months ago. And if you feel the need to update them, I guess there's no harm in doing them again.
Brilliant, thank you. Is there hat fitting training available, was the question. So particularly bearing in mind social distancing, is there any hat fitting training available? I think we probably need to look into that. But do you want to describe what you do, Lynne and Sarah, in relation to hat fitting?
Do you want that one, Lynne?
Well, I think we need to be cautious, don't we, about hat fitting. And hat fitting is always one of these fairly contentious issues about whether you need to have been on a hat fitting course pre-COVID that we're talking about as well. So if you think that what we need to establish is that when riders restart, there needs to be one hat per head. And so sharing hats is not the way to go when riders restart. So they need to have their own helmet that's specifically for them, because hat sharing isn't permissible currently. And so thinking about whether we can actually hat fit is one of those slightly grey areas about how many hats you've got and whether you can then safely apply them, maintaining social distancing, to riders. I mean, Sarah, do you want to say what you do at Pennywells?
Yeah, yeah, certainly. All those that returned to us after the first lockdown, I insisted that they went out and they got their own hats. So they were able to have them either measured or fitted at the time with advice. And I think there's quite a few really good videos online, actually. Certainly some of the main brands have got videos out there that you can look up for hat fitting, and they're really quite clear, and you really can get it right by measuring, and the shape of your head and all those different details are on there. So I really would suggest advising if parents are going to go shopping for a new hat that you signpost them to some of these good videos that show really good hat fitting and how you can choose the style, because some makes will fit riders better than others. We've all got different sizes and shapes, and I think that's important as well. But we certainly haven't done any hat sharing yet. If I think we started to have a few where we would lend a hat, but like Lynne says, it's literally one hat and that rider keeps that hat until we're allowed to be sharing things again. So we're being very cautious.
Yeah, so just to pick up on that, we have had some information from Beta about, I want to say it's the aqueous, it's on the My RDA website. You can sanitize the hat inside and out because it's a water-based product, so it won't damage the hat at all. And so during the release, towards the back end of the release of lockdown last year, there were some groups that were sharing hats, but it was making sure it was sanitized and that that hat in effect was quarantined. So actually it wasn't going from one head to another. So it was well sanitized. The sanitizer was dry. And I believe different groups had slightly different approaches, but some of them were quarantining them for 72 hours. Now that won't work in some instances, but the belt and braces approach is exactly as Lynne and Sarah have described, about having an individual hat for each rider. Oh, sorry, Lynne.
All I was going to say is, and can people please make sure that the loose end of the strap actually has a keeper, and so there's no possibility of it dropping down and being handled and so on with some of our riders. And so it's one of those things. And so just easy to put a keeper on. If the keeper's broken, then you can just use a plaiting band to keep that tail end secure and away, because it becomes something to handle, and we don't want that.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Lynne. The next question is, will slides be available on email? This entire webinar will be available on the My RDA YouTube channel. So you'll be able to watch it all back rather than necessarily just look at the slides. So the next comment is actually, don't forget disclosure checks must be up to date for volunteers. So I think that's a really good reminder as well. So when we're making sure we're checking our volunteer forms and everything, we need to make sure the disclosure checks are up to date. I've got a question here about consent forms and having vaccine information. I think I've already covered that with information about vaccines. Sarah's COVID consent form that you've adapted for coaches, I think there are a couple of people that would really like a copy of that. So I think what we'll do is we'll work with you so we can get that copy put on My RDA, so that we're not having to send it out to lots of people individually.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I'll email it to you.
Brilliant, thank you. So most CPD on the events page is first aid. Where else is the CPD being advertised? Can I ask that of you, Jo?
Yeah, we haven't finalised any of the CPD dates as of yet. They will be coming. They will be on the events page. Any coach that was due a review will be also contacted directly alongside the county and regional coaches. So we will be distributing details of CPD every way we can to make sure that everyone can pick up those details and get involved.
Brilliant, thank you very much. I got on here, love the idea of a volunteer survey. We have 150 plus. Any chance that Pennywells can share? So I'll put you in touch with Kim there, and maybe you can share your survey with her. So excellent. And then I've got a question here. Do all those participating in an RDA session need to have a COVID test first? So obviously lateral flow tests are quite a new thing. So obviously this is what schools are doing at the moment. We're not stipulating that they have to have a COVID test. We have opened up successfully last year when lateral flow tests weren't even a thing. So we absolutely would require a symptom check before anybody came on site every single time. And some groups use like a text messaging system. So text message the volunteers, the participants, saying, how are you feeling? Have you done your symptom check? And then getting to the text back before they arrive on site. We currently are not mandating COVID tests, but if that changes, we will update the My RDA site and we will let you know. If you can get hold of lateral flow tests, it probably is good practice, but we need to understand before we make that more widely available. So somebody said here, so since COVID, we've encouraged people to buy their own personal hat. Okay, so I've got a hippotherapy question here. Lynne, you might be able to answer this, but I might also. I know the hippotherapy policy, but you might know more details. Are we okay leading ponies for hippotherapy sessions? Are there any different rules for hippotherapy?
Hippotherapy within RDA, which is what we're talking about, isn't it? There are different rules and regulations about PPE, because we're governed by our Charter Society of Physiotherapy, and so there are different things that have to be in place before hippotherapy can restart, because of the very close contact nature of the service that we're providing. And so leading in hippotherapy would still be under the same guidelines that leading an RDA is, because after all, it's an RDA equine that you're leading. And so within the hippotherapy situation, the leading would still be under the same requirements. So that wouldn't be different at all. But the actual whole practice of hippotherapy with an RDA is very different from therapeutic riding restarting. And that's why there's been a delay with hippotherapy restarting because of that requirement.
Yeah. So just to really add to that, that's absolutely right. So there is a lot more detail about hippotherapy on the MyRDA site. So on the Road to Restart, there is a whole hippotherapy page, and there are different forms to fill in, because the volunteers involved in hippotherapy will have to wear full PPE under the supervision of the hippotherapist. And so that is absolutely key, and they would have to consent to do that. There is also more PPE requirement for the equines, and so the equines need to be trained to accept the greater levels of PPE as well. So if you've got hippotherapy in your group, you'll need to be signed off not just for the COVID-19 risk assessment, but also a hippotherapy risk assessment as well, because of the greater level of risks involved that Lynne talked about. So I've got a question here. It becomes difficult when we're asking parents stroke carers to sidewalk, as they need to wear a hat too. Also, what is the current RDA UK view about all volunteers wearing gloves?
Okay. We don't ask any of our sidewalkers to wear hats unless we're doing show jumping lessons. So I think, again, every group is different. If your group has hats for everybody, again, they shouldn't be sharing. And that might be a stumbling block to some of them coming back, possibly. I don't know. But certainly we don't expect our sidewalkers and leaders to wear hats all the time.
And one point is that if sidewalkers and leaders do wear hats, they still have to be to the current RDA standards, that they can't just be their hat that they've had for 20 years that they're just putting on for RDA. So it has to be checked as well.
Yeah. And I'm just going to pick up the comment made about gloves. So if, for example, someone is supporting someone to mount and dismount and needs to sort of touch them, as it were, and help swing a leg over or something, we're actually recommending for that the person supporting them doesn't wear gloves, and in effect sanitizes their hands thoroughly before they do it, and then sanitizes their hands thoroughly afterwards as well. Because I'm sure you can imagine, when we talk about gloves, we talk about riding gloves, which tend to go from horse to person to horse, and actually that's not very hygienic. So where you're actually having to touch an individual in those close proximity situations that are very fleeting, and you're wearing a face covering while you're doing it, then we don't recommend wearing gloves. If you're holding lead reins, if you're holding anything like that, then actually you should be wearing gloves, but you shouldn't be touching the individual with those gloves, if that makes sense. I hope that answers that. That's all the questions I've got on Q&A. I'm aware that we're massively over time, but I've still got 6 more comments in the chat. So I'm going to try and get through these, because I've got over 100 people still listening to this. So yeah, we've got the question about consent form, just some great, some comments about the volunteer survey. Should we take temperatures on riders? So we have had some groups that have got those temperature guns when people arrive and take temperatures, but we have many others as well who don't, saying actually they believe those temperature guns to be unreliable. Sarah or Lynne, what do you do in your groups?
Yeah, we haven't. We have got one of those temperature guns, but yeah, I wasn't convinced by it. It seemed to have everybody a lot colder, and when we used it on staff, they've almost supposedly been dead. So I don't trust it. So I think we just need to talk to people and find out if they've got symptoms. You can see if somebody's got a temperature. And I would like to think most people coming into our premises are honest enough to admit if they're not feeling well on the day, and then they wouldn't come.
Yeah, brilliant. I agree with Sarah, because it's the interpretation of it as well, isn't it? So depending, like Sarah said about the reading, whether it's really high or really low, then it's how you interpret that, and then what you then recommend to be done about that. And so there's a knock on with that too. And so I think, like Sarah has said, it's far better to get people to be able to tell you if they're feeling unwell, and make it clear that they have to phone you beforehand to say they're fit to come and so on. Yeah. One question that I had, Anna, beforehand, was should the maximum riding weight of an equine be lowered in the light of the fact that the rider may be deconditioned because they haven't ridden for a long time, so they've got decreased fitness, and the horses may similarly have decreased fitness because they're not working. And so Sarah and I have spoken about this, and we both agree that yes, of course. So what the maximum riding carrying weight of the horse before COVID, when the horse was fit and the rider was at their fittest, then that's very different to what they might be at now. And so you need to look at it with an objective eye and assess rider fitness, and with equine fitness.
Is it me or is it everybody that's come?
I think we've lost Sarah.
Oh yeah, I think so.
Oh, so I just heard this another person joining us. So should that maximum riding weight be lowered? And of course, the unanimous answer is yes, it should. But of course, what you're going to ask now in the chat box is by how much? And of course, that's a very difficult question to answer, isn't it? So you need to be guided by your regional equine advisors, as well as your more senior coaches, if you've got any question about how much carrying weight for your equine.
Brilliant, thank you, Lynn. I'm sure people will be really interested in that. I've got one final comment, and it's actually really interesting given the comment I made about lateral flow tests. Please be aware that COVID testing is not usually expected for children. I expect the question related to volunteers, but just in case, especially those with any sensory issues, as it's quite invasive. So, and also there's stuff in the press about some of these lateral flow tests being having lots of false positives, and therefore schools not getting back to kind of their normal capacity because of that. So we'll keep a very close eye on that. But at the moment, we're not saying that you need to be tested before you come to a session. I think that is it for all the questions. I'm just going to double check the Q&A because I know we're really out of time, so apologies for that. I think we're all done for questions, so thank you so much, Lynn and Sarah, and thank you, Joe, as well, for putting this all together today. It's been really, really informative, so thank you for coming along today. Next week, we're focusing on the equine, so we've talked a fair bit about the equine, but it's restarting equines next week. We've got Doug Smith, our equine lead, Beth Randalls, our National Training Centre manager, will also be present, and Eileen Cornish, our new carriage driving lead, and she'll be talking about restarting driving equines. So hopefully we'll have a bumper session next Thursday at 7 p.m. Thank you, everybody, and hopefully see you next week. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.